The last conversation I had with my father was on December 18th, 2020. He had suffered a massive stroke about a week before. And I had this conversation with him over FaceTime, and I just tried to play it off like everything was fine. I just walked around the house and I showed him the holiday decorations I had hung, stuff like that. But the truth of it is, he didn't really know what was going on for most of that conversation. But at the very end, he became lucid, and through heavily slurred words, he said, "I really enjoyed being your father." And he died the next morning. And it was right in the middle of COVID, so we couldn't have a funeral, and my brother and I had planned on doing a celebration of life in the summer, but life is very complicated and a bunch of things got in the way, and we never pulled it off, and all of a sudden it's been 18 months since my father died, and I've been thinking a lot about him recently because his birthday is actually in a couple of days. He would have been 82 years old on June 12th. And he always loved to celebrate his birthday by going to his favorite diner, and he'd order a big greasy breakfast, and he'd hang out with his friends and family, and he'd tell corny jokes, and he'd eat, and he'd laugh. He laughed all the time. And I'd like to stand up here and say that he was this source of infinite wisdom, and he always had all the right answers, but I mean, the truth is it's not the case. He was just a regular guy, and he was stumbling through life, and he was just trying to do the best that he could. But I can say that as I was growing up, every time I saw him stumble, I also saw him get back up, and I think that I learned from that. And one of the great things about my father is he had this comically inflated sense of self-confidence when it came to fixing things around the house. He thought that tradespeople of any kind were part of a massive conspiracy designed to drive him into bankruptcy by charging him to fix things that he could fix himself. But believe me when I tell you, he did not have the skill set to be fixing these things. And because of that, he was constantly finding himself in these situations that were the perfect combination of hysterical and life-threatening. And so one time I was about 14 years old, and I'm hanging out in my room, and I'm just listening to music. And my dad's out in the garage, which is right next to my room, and he's working on the car. And all of a sudden, the door that connects my room to the garage just gets kicked open, and my father's there, and he's sweaty, he's red-faced, and he's just pissed. And he looks at me, he says, "What, are you deaf?" And I'm completely confused, and I'm like, "What are you talking about? What is going on?" And he says, "I have been locked in the trunk of that car for 25 minutes. I've been screaming and yelling for help. You're telling me you couldn't hear me?" And I just say, "You locked yourself in the trunk of the car?" And he says, "Shut up!" And he just goes storming off. And so eventually I stop laughing and I track my father down because I need to know the series of events that have led to a grown man locking himself into the trunk of his own car. And he explains to me that the trunk wasn't staying shut, so he grabs a screwdriver and a flashlight and he climbed inside. And he shuts the trunk and he sees that there's this latch that's supposed to click over to keep the trunk shut, and it's not working. So he takes the screwdriver and he pries the latch over while he's still in the trunk. And he realizes immediately that he's made this terrible mistake because this is the 1980s, so you don't have a cell phone in your pocket to call for help. And there's no safety cord to pull to get you out of the trunk. In the 1980s, if you're locked in the trunk of a car, you are locked in the trunk of a car. And so, naturally, he panics for a while, and he manages to calm himself down, and he remembers that he's still got the screwdriver with him, and he takes that, and he pries himself out of the trunk and frees himself, and then he comes to find me to yell at for some reason. And as he's telling me the story, he can even see how ridiculously funny it is. And he starts cracking up, and we're both having a great laugh about it. And that was the thing that I loved. No matter what the situation was with my father, whether it was the time that he was burning leaves in the backyard and he almost burned our house down, or that he didn't want to pay a guy to cut a tree down, so he destroyed our pool fence when he cut the tree down himself, or he dropped our air conditioning unit out of our second-story window because he was installing himself. At the end of the day, he would always be laughing about it. And I always really admired that about my dad. And I told this trunk story so many times over the years to make fun of my dad, and he always laughed about it. But one time I was telling it, and he got a little serious, and he said, "You know, you're always telling people how I locked myself in the trunk, but you never tell people how I got myself out." And he says, "You know, it just goes to show if you can calm down and you look around, you can always find your way out of a situation." So I have an 8-year-old daughter now, her name is Rain, and I like to think that as I'm stumbling through parenthood and stumbling through life in general, that I'm showing her that it's okay to falter and it's okay to make mistakes. And like my dad taught me, I'm hoping that she's learning that mistakes are something that you can learn from, and you don't have to be embarrassed by it. And, you know, I feel like it's tragic that Rain isn't going to get to know her grandfather, and he's not going to be part of her life as she grows up, and she'll never get to know him like I knew him. But I know everybody here, judging by the stories that have been told, feels like as long as you're telling stories about these people, that they're never really gone. So I think that this year, on my dad's birthday, I'm going to take Rain to the diner down the street from my house, and we're going to order a couple of really big, greasy breakfasts, and I'm going to tell her about the time her grandfather locked himself in the trunk of his car. And I hope that those stories and the laughter keep my dad around for a very long time. And I hope that everybody who hears those stories realizes how much I just truly enjoyed being his son. Thank you.